Greetings, friends and Firebirds fans, and welcome to the January edition of the Fire and Ice podcast, the official podcast of your Coachella Valley Firebirds of the American Hockey League. Coming to you from Palm Desert, California. It's about a mile down the way from the Firebirds' home of Acrisure Arena. I'm your host, Judd Spicer. I have the privilege, pride, and pleasure of serving as your Firebirds insider in this inaugural season, along with posting this podcast on a monthly basis throughout the Firebirds inaugural campaign. Also doing a few articles a month for the team. You can find those online at cvfirebirds.com. A lot to cover, a lot to gush about, a lot to get to this January episode of the Fire and Ice podcast. And let me start by announcing this month's guest, and it's a great one. Patrick Williams. He's on the beat for the American Hockey League, covers the AHL and also some NHL. You can find his work online at theahl.com. Might also suggest giving Patrick a follow via the Twitter routes, as I do, at PWilliamsAHL. Look forward to discussing the Firebirds' inaugural season with Patrick. He's already done a few great articles on the team at theahl.com. Before the chat and visit with Patrick, however, let's get to this month's Firebirds freeze frame, and I'd certainly be bearing the lead if I didn't mention that our Coachella Valley Firebirds are off to what could be described as a rather unbelievable start to the inaugural season. With a record of 26-3, this team has the best win percentage as of this first week of January 2023. Best win percentage in the entire American Hockey League, having won 8 of 10, winners of 5 straight to close out 2022, leading the Pacific Division. That's through 29 games of this 72-game inaugural season. Undoubtedly, a lot of firsts took place since the December episode and the visit with Firebirds' Troy Bodie, Director of Hockey and Business Operations. Of course, we had that inaugural Acrisure Arena game on December 18th, victory over Tucson. We had the December 23rd game, a very tense and physical 1-0 win over Henderson, and what was a teddy bear, or the teddy bear toss game, I should say. Scoreless until 6 minutes left in the game. Then those teddy bears, about 7,200 and change all told, those had the pleasure of flying onto the ice. And of course, the 7-6 comeback win over Ontario on December 28th, what is dubbed the Ice 10 Showdown with the highway rivals. That game represented, by the way, the first of 8 games on the schedule between the Firebirds and Ontario. Represents a whopping 17% of the remaining games in this inaugural season. As we turn the page in the new year to January, no shortage of opportunity to see the Firebirds in action at Acrisure Arena starting on Wednesday, January 4th with the 7 p.m. home contest versus Colorado. That represents the first of 7 home games here in the desert for the Firebirds. The first of 7 home games in an 18-day stretch. The lone road game in that window being played just 80 miles away on January 21st. That's a Saturday game at Ontario. So after a lot of road time, after a lot of away games, after the anticipation of getting inside Acrisure Arena, finally, the Firebirds can get those skates firmly in the desert sands for a long stretch here throughout the month of January. In this Firebirds freeze frame, let's get to some of these stats. And by the way, for all this scheduling, for all these statistics, all information on roster, team, ticketing, community efforts, and parking, you can find that online at cvfirebirds.com. Might I also recommend downloading that Coachella Valley Firebirds app on your phone. Great way to follow the team, purchase tickets, single game tickets included. Again, that's the Coachella Valley Firebirds phone application. As for those aforementioned stats, well, as you imagine, given the 26-3 record, there's a lot of good ones to report. Tied for the team lead with 31 points apiece. Again, entering this first week of January, Andrew Podorowski. His 31 points include a team high 23 assists. He is tied with Saskatchewan's Cole Lind with those 31 points. By the way, those two fellas are tied for 12th in the entire AHL with those 31-point bounties to date. Not far behind a pair of other stellar players, Sweden's Jesper Froden and team captain Max McCormick. They stand at 30 points apiece. Jesper Froden's 30-point tally includes a team-high 15 goals. Should also make mention that John Hayden, right behind those players with 22 points, that includes 11 goals and 11 assists. Minding the net for the Firebirds, Joey Decord, whom in one post-game interview that I attended, head coach Dan Bilesma referred to as, quote, our best player. Joey Decord, 11-4 in the net on the season thus far with 2 shutouts. Christopher Gibson, our other goalie, also having a stellar campaign to date, 6-2 record. He has 1 shutout to his credit. All that offered, all that prefaced, let's get to this month's visit with Patrick Williams. Covers the AHL at theahl.com. All right, friends. Here on the Fire and Ice podcast, the official podcast of our Coachella Valley Firebirds. You've heard me in recent months amply gush about the Firebirds' inaugural season. Let's let somebody else do it a little bit. We're turning to an expert gentleman that has covered pro hockey for 2 decades. He is on the beat for the American Hockey League. You can find his work, as mentioned, at theahl.com. Also suggest giving his Twitter a follow at pwilliamsahl. Welcome, Patrick Williams, to the Fire and Ice podcast. Patrick, Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time. I know you got a lot of hockey to cover, but let's stick to the Firebirds as offered at the outset of this January episode. A record of 26-3 as of this conversation in this opening week of the new year. Coachella Valley Firebirds have the best win percentage in the entire American Hockey League. Please tell me that I'm not alone in being amazed by this record and that statistic.
You know, I was thinking about that the other day. Like, if you add up all the different variables, right? Like the fact they, were on the road for their first 24 games, and even those early home games were in Seattle, so that was kind of a little bit of a different situation there. And basically from the time they went to training camp in September until the better part of mid-December. They didn't have a true home game, right? Like they played those 4 games in Seattle, but that was, kind of, not their own building, right? And
right.
They were on the road. So that's the first thing. Number 2 is the division they're in, which for my money is the strongest division in the entire league. They're every week they're getting a steady dose of, some of the best, opponents and competition that, the league can offer. And, you're playing Calgary, you're playing Ontario, you're playing, some of the just, real strong Colorado, right? Right down the list. Abbotsford's really emerged as a strong team. So the schedule maker did not give them any breaks. Just the nature of, the arena being, later to open. So I think when you add up all those different elements, I mean, it's really, for my money, been the most impressive performance of any team in the league for the better part of here. The first third, almost we're approaching the halfway point of the season.
Let's say, just even as a hypothetical, that they hadn't had all those logistics take place. They hadn't had all that travel take place. They hadn't had all the away games or what were kind of the faux home games take place for any team in this division, which they lead. In this league, a 26-3 record is rather unbelievable, is it not, for an expansion franchise?
Absolutely. I mean, you had some of these players, they were in Charlotte last season, part of a dual affiliation, which is, it's always a tricky setup for any team, especially because they were somewhat of the junior partner um, there with the Florida Panthers, who were, kind of the primary affiliate there. And, so you have that element. And then this summer they had to stock the rest of the team. So that's another challenge. And the third challenge is they don't really have an influx of draft picks yet. Seattle's only had two draft classes, and most of those players are not really eligible yet for the AHL. So it's largely a group of free agents and players that they were able to kind of cobble together and form a really strong roster. And full credit too has to go to the coaching staff there. I mean, to get that kind of cohesion, which is one of the biggest challenges in this league for the first, I'd say the first 2 months of the year, generally, even some of the best teams, it's a real difficult task. Just the level of turnover, the amount of youth in the league. Teams really struggle establishing that identity, establishing their systems, getting all those elements in place that will, if all goes well, serve them, well going down the stretch. So they were able to get those pieces in place early, and I think they got on top of teams, a lot more quickly than some of them. The opponents were ready, so um, they really haven't missed a beat right from the get go, and I think that's what's been impressive. And real good, strong leadership core there. They brought in Podorowski, back to back lead scoring champion, and then a lot of good, solid kind of complementary players. Max McCormick, Cameron Hughes, just the guys that you can really count on. Matt Tennyson, local guy from the Southern California
Right.
area. So they did a great job, really getting kind of that veteran core in place. And those are the guys that anchor you early on in the season. As some of the younger players start to find their way at the pro level. Those players have delivered, and the result is just what he said. Top team in the league right now in terms of percentage.
You and I are having this conversation. I follow this team quite closely. You follow all 32 teams in the American Hockey League quite closely, but I can't imagine that this shared opinion between you and I is just a conversation you and I are having. I mean, in your beat work for the AHL, have you talked with other teams, players, executives, coaches, whomever about this rather
Mm-hmm.
incredible start for the Coachella Valley Firebirds?
Oh yeah, definitely it's taken notice, and I think that's especially notable in the fact in some ways this league is almost four leagues in one because it's such a division heavy schedule. So you don't tend to always have a lot of awareness. Teams in the East don't tend to follow a lot of what's going on in the West. But I think first off, just the fact the team Coachella Valley, the Palm Springs market in general, that caught a lot of people's attention, right off the bat. Then they saw the new Acrisure Arena, that certainly caught their attention, and then the performance of the team. So I think it was funny. I was talking to Troy Bodie a couple weeks back, and one of his concerns in the summer was, how are we going to sign players? Like how are we going to make that pitch to players? Well, you can sign here, but we're on the road for 2.5 months. Turns out that it was actually a pretty smooth sales pitch because players, the fact they could live in Coachella Valley, and then B, just I mean, they got wind of the facilities there. I mean, a top-notch facility is going to attract attention from players. So those two elements really did help put together a team. So I think when you look around the league, yeah, players, coaches, management, especially, are noticing it. It is a copycat business. Teams want to emulate what some of the best practices that are going on. And I think if you look at Coachella Valley, at least here for the first third of the season, certainly some of the best practices you could ask for.
And further referencing that conversation you had with Troy Bodie, my most recent guest on Fire and Ice podcast for the December edition, you unearthed some great stuff, a lot of logistical stuff. I'm not going to necessarily say, Patrick, I was jealous, but I haven't spoken with and interviewed Troy many times. You got some great details about some of those logistics that people wouldn't even think about when we're talking about a hockey team or even an
Mm-hmm.
arena, just all the flux of getting the players places to live and getting their vehicles here. I mean, in that conversation for the article you did right before the close of the year, was there one or two things that Troy told you that really jumped out about the feat of getting the team basically from one market to another in season?
Yeah, the funny thing was when he mentioned the baggage fees, for flying the players down, flying their equipment, and they just decided to truck all the equipment down to Palm Springs because it was baggage fees were going to be through the roof, right? I think any of us who have flown can relate to that. You're trying to squeeze in as much as you can, right, without paying those baggage fees. And I know that teams that fly a lot, that's a significant cost, right? Like a road trip for 5 or 6 games. When you're flying from one city to the next, you're flying commercial. So teams, they're looking for every chance they can to save some money, in that regard. And so that was a major logistical undertaking. And then the second part was, I think the same thing that stood out to you was the housing, right? Like a lot of players were literally just going online and going through those kind of like those virtual tours on the apartment websites and thinking like, all right, I think this is good, and you never totally know, right, until you actually get there and set foot. So it is sort of a little bit of a leap of faith for those players that, hopefully, this apartment is what I think it is. The team certainly helped out a lot too. They actually acquired some apartment leases in the summer and then transferred them to the players. Other players, they wanted to find it on their own. And then you have, in some cases, some of the older players have families, so that's a whole other element, schools and those aspects. Yeah, so a lot of things that people don't necessarily think of. And remember, you're doing it now. You're not doing it like the NHL does, where you have charter flights and you kind of have an unlimited, pool of money
Right.
almost. The AHL teams they run things on a pretty lean budget. So that was, full credit to Troy Bodie and his staff for pulling that off.
You referenced a few times Acrisure Arena. Have you had opportunity to see the arena in person yet, Patrick?
Not yet. It's on the calendar for probably March. I think you're going to see a lot of teams. With the way the schedule is, you more or less can pick your opponents. I think you're going to see a lot of teams that want to do a home and home next year with Coachella. I know that I kind of was joking early on, that the Iowa Wild, for example, very smart scheduling on their part. They set it up that they're going to be, I think, in Coachella and San Diego for the better part of a week in March, which I think is a very nice point in the schedule. For your players to go on the road and have that road experience. And I mean, really, what you couldn't find two better places to be in the middle of March than San Diego and Coachella Valley.
Conversely, for the Firebird side of the schedule, January slate, they finally get a lengthy homestand. They only have three away games. One of those is 80 miles away in Ontario later this month. That is followed by actually a trip to play in Iowa against the
Mm-hmm.
Iowa Wild on the 26th and 28th, respectively. I trust that visit to Iowa for a brief time. The dudes will probably be ready to get back to peak season here in the desert. Friends, you are tuning in to the Fire and Ice podcast, January edition. It's the official podcast of Coachella Valley Firebirds. I'm your host, Judd Spicer. Patrick Williams, covered pro hockey for 2 decades, covers the American Hockey League at the AHL.com. Also suggest following him on Twitter. That's at P. Williams AHL. Again, Patrick Williams is my guest. Interesting, Patrick. I read this in one of your other articles. I think it was your 2022 wrap that Acrisure Arena is not the only new arena in the AHL this year. There are actually two others, both of which are in our division. Henderson and San Jose also have both have new facilities this year, correct?
Yeah, Henderson kind of they let it off last April. They opened Dollar Loan Center, $64 million facility. Henderson's essentially right on the outskirts of Las Vegas there, so kind of a suburb in a way, and beautiful facility, top notch. I mean, can match up with anybody. And then San Jose Barracuda, they opened up Tech CU Arena. It was in addition to the San Jose Sharks practice facility. That was a major victory for the Barracuda. They had played their first 7 years in the SAP Center, which is the home of the NHL team, and that's I think it's 17,000 seats, and it didn't make for a great home environment. So now they got their own building. It's kind of the right fit for them, the right size, everything top notch. So it's been remarkable. Like when I think about when I started off, and it was a league largely confined to the kind of northeastern United States and part of the Midwest, and a lot of smaller markets, older buildings, and now you're in the Las Vegas market, you're in the Bay Area, and now you're in Coachella Valley, and not only are you there, but you're there in top notch facilities. Better part of $500 million,
Yeah.
spent on arenas just this year. So it shows a big commitment, I think, from clubs, NHL clubs especially, that they're really investing. It used to kind of be like it was wherever you could find an empty market with a building available, that was good enough, right? And now teams, that whole shift to the West Coast in 2015 really kind of turned the league, upside down, and it was a challenging undertaking for the entire league to do that. So they had 11 affiliation or city changes in one summer. So that was that was difficult, and they did have to they lost some markets they really didn't like, but it did get the league to a much healthier footing, and it gave NHL teams what they were looking for, which was geographically convenient affiliates. And even a team like Coachella Valley, map on the map, it doesn't necessarily look like it's close to Seattle, but it's a 2-hour flight, direct flight back and forth, so it's an easy. You can put a player on the plane at 7 in the morning, and he's in Seattle by 10 o'clock for morning skate, vice versa. So that's what teams are looking for. They're not looking to have players 3 time zones away and kind of off the beaten path. Now, if you're a prospect, you're being seen by NHL management, on a pretty much a daily basis.
Sticking with that geography for a moment, between the NHL and the American Hockey League, 8 professional teams in the state of California gained one with the Firebirds this year, and actually lost one with the former
Mm.
Stockton team now in Calgary. Is the notion, Patrick, of the non-traditional hockey market, is that just totally antiquated at this point?
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's out the window. I mean, just even you look at where players. I mean, I just did a piece on Paul Gutman of Rockford, and he's from the L.A. area, and grew up, born and raised, not one of those situations where he was born and moved off to kind of a traditional hockey market. He was California through and through, and played Division I hockey at the University of Denver, captain, kind of all the elements that you'd want in a young player's resume. He has them. I mean, players come from anywhere now, right? Texas. I mean, I I think you're almost as likely to see an American player now as you are, the traditional, player from Manitoba, or your typical, prairie type province situation. So I mean, it's opened a whole new element, to great young talent, and I think the hockey world is that much stronger for it.
You also talked about, we don't need to throw anybody under the proverbial bus here. Don't need to name any names. I mean, obviously, the Firebirds are playing in a $500 million arena. When I've heard the players discuss this, either casually or in a post-game press conference, they're playing thus far in front of over 8,000 fans or sellout crowds for every game. They've discussed the practice facility, the locker rooms, the workout facility is all basically being NHL level. In contrast with when you started covering the American Hockey League, I mean, you must have been to some places that I grew up basically playing in as a native Minnesotan. Again, don't need to name any teams or any cities, but just to give folks that have only been to Acrisure Arena a point of contrast of how great our place is versus what kind of conditions guys could be playing in. What are one or two things that you see in your AHA travels that you're like, man, this is kind of the Podunk AHL?
Yeah, it was really different. You used to have a lot of buildings that were they had seen better days, and they were aging, and they didn't have the spacious dressing room area. A lot of I remember the thing I do remember a lot of teams that if they got kicked out of their arena because of an event or something, they would literally their practice in a community rink wherever they could kind of find available ice. And so kind of in between the kids' birthday parties, there'd be the American Hockey League team holding a practice, right? So but those days are gone, right? Like the investment that NHL teams put in now in terms of facilities, in terms of development staff, in terms of some signing big contracts now. Like if you're a solid AHL veteran, you can make $450,000 a season, right? This is not the old kind of gritty, rough and tumble AHL of the past where you think guys are just barely scraping by. Like you can make a great living as a player, on that kind of that NHL AHL bubble, and that's why you get a Podorowski, that's why you get a Cameron Hughes, guys like that. Rather than them going to Europe, for example, right? So it's a much more attractive landscape for players. And I should add though that that was a long road, right? Like Dave Andrews, the former president CEO, took over in 1994. It was a small league. It was 16 teams. A lot of teams are kind of on a year-to-year basis, barely holding on. In markets that were, we're going through some rough times, and slowly but surely he chipped away, and here we are. 29 years later. Scott Helson has taken over since then, but the league has come through a lot of difficult periods, and come out that much stronger for it.
You mentioned several of the Firebird players, Patrick, that are having sterling first halves of the campaign. Andrew Podorowski, he is tied for the team lead at 31 points. No shocker there, as you said, two-time reigning AHL scoring champion, also has team high 23 assists. Cameron Hughes, you mentioned, Cole Lind, Jesper Froden, team captain Max McCormick, also both goalies, Joey Decord, Christopher Gibson, having solid seasons. Also having a solid season is the Big Daddy Club, the Seattle Kraken, which is probably muting a bit some of the opportunities that these guys may have to rightfully ascend to the NHL. I don't know if there's one guy on the Firebirds roster thus far that you might particularly be keeping an eye on, someone that we should be watching out for, because we might not see him for much longer. That they're just too good to not be on an NHL roster. Anyone in particular?
Yeah, Cole Lind really stands out just in terms of he's one of their young prospects. I mean, Seattle doesn't have a ton of them yet, but he definitely stands out. Riker Evans, another player that's kind of has caught my eye early on. And you are right, though, that, I think, one of the selling points for Coachella Valley and for Seattle was, all right, you have a team that only played one season in the NHL. This is still somewhat of an expansion club. Maybe there will be more opportunities. So, if you're a player, you're evaluating your options, that had to be pretty attractive. Like, if I'm on the bubble, I have a shot, rather than, if I'm in Tampa or if I'm in, Colorado, somewhere like that, where, it's pretty much a closed path for a player on the bubble. So, I think that was a big part of getting a player like Podorowski. He had been kind of blocked there in Carolina's system there, playing in Chicago last season. So, sure he came there and that looked attracted to him. And then, as it turned out, Seattle, I think, is, outperformed everybody's expectations this year. So maybe those opportunities aren't there as much, but any good NHL team and affiliate by extension in that internal competition is huge. And it forces everyone to raise their game. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing there with Coachella, because if you don't, you're not even going to have any chance to have even get a few games with Seattle.
Let me ask you lastly today, Patrick, you mentioned that you're going to be out here in March. Look forward to meeting in person and shaking a hand. Right about that time, the home stretch of the season. This is a new team. It's a new market. It's a new franchise. It's a new arena. It's an area that has never before had a full-time professional sports franchise. As we get to that home stretch, it looks like a team that'll very likely, if not decidedly, making a strong playoff push. Of the 10-team Pacific, 7 of those teams ascend to the playoff round. What can we expect? What kind of atmosphere? I mean, thus far, I've been very impressed with what the fans have done and how they've come out to Acrisure Arena. They've been into the games. They've been having fun. They've been loud. But as you get to those last, 10, 12 games and you're making a push, paint the scene for us a little bit. What do you see change in AHL arenas as the regular season is winding down?
That intensity just picks up. A lot of that kind of that growing pain element for young players is more or less gone by the wayside by the time you get into March and April. So that really sharpens the level of play. This is such a division heavy league that you do every game becomes that kind of proverbial 4-point game down the stretch. So that's the second element. And then, once you get in the playoffs, I mean, this is a league too where, trying to make playoff predictions is really a fool's errand because so much of it can come down to what your NHL team does. If your NHL team either doesn't make the playoffs or gets bounced early, you can get an influx of, 2, 3, or 4 players, real solid impact players that can come down and completely, shift a roster. Now that can be a challenge because it can also sort of, upset the delicate balance that you might have, so that's a challenge that, coach has to navigate. But, when you look at, that division, you got Ontario an hour or so away. You got, real good rival. I think that you'll see emerge in Colorado. Calgary's legit. They're a team that went to the Western Conference Final last year as Stockton. So it's going to be a rough, tough battle. But I think it's playoff hockey, right? It's great.
We'll look forward to that eventual atmosphere, and again, look forward to seeing you in our new barn in person come March. Patrick Williams, again, friends, check out his work at theahl.com. Give him a follow at P. Williams AHL via the Twitter routes. And I'll just add, Patrick, so appreciative of your time. And I've so enjoyed reading your work. Anybody out here specifically in the desert that is just learning about the American Hockey League, wants to get a better complexion of the league as a whole, they need to read your stuff. They need to follow your stuff. I've learned a lot about the American Hockey League just by following you and reading your work over the course of the past year or two. Keep it up. Appreciate your coverage of the Firebirds. Hope that you have opportunity to write more about the team as the season progresses.
Yeah, I think I will. I think, I can definitely see them playing May and June, like the way they're going. So, looking forward to it.
As am I. Happy New Year, sir. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. You as well.
All right, folks. Readily enjoyed that visit with Patrick Williams. Again, you can follow his coverage of the American Hockey League at theahl.com or via the Twitter routes at P. Williams AHL. I've been your host, Judd Spicer, proudly serving as your Firebirds insider for this inaugural season, along with this monthly Fire and Ice podcast, the official podcast of the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Also have the pleasure of penning a couple of articles per month. You can find those online at cvfirebirds.com. And of course, when you go to that website, you're looking for more than the humble articles of yours truly. You can find all of your information on Firebirds team, roster, ticketing, parking information, community efforts. Again, that's online at cvfirebirds.com. You should also download that Coachella Valley Firebirds app. Hey, I'm kind of a technical knucklehead myself, but I did that in about 93 seconds and found it a very useful tool, an additional tool to follow the Coachella Valley Firebirds. And may I add, when you're surfing around the internet, check out what's going on with the adjoining and adjacent ice rink to Acrisure Arena, the on-site Burger Foundation Iceplex. They like to call it the coolest spot in the desert. You can find information online at Burger, BERGER, FoundationIceplex.com. A whole host of community offerings going on there, including, but certainly not limited to, the Skate Academy lessons, public skating, a host of on-ice opportunities, private ice rentals, the Lil Firebirds, learning how to play hockey, Firebirds Youth Hockey Rec League, and adult hockey as well. You can sign up simply to learn how to play, or there's a full adult hockey league being offered at the Burger Foundation Iceplex. That's January. A lot of New Year's resolutions going on right now for those adult hockey leagues. Might be a great way to get in shape by putting on the pads yourself. Friends, appreciate your time, your interest, your ears. Thank you for tuning in to the January edition of the Fire and Ice podcast, the official podcast of your Coachella Valley Firebirds. I'm your host, Judd Spicer. I look forward to seeing you at Acrisure Arena as we dig further into the Firebirds' inaugural and amazing season thus far. And remember, one valley, one team, rising together.